Welcome back to Alien Mystery Files, where shadow people, UFO bases, and lost... Like, comment, and subscribe before they...
Captain Maya Ortiz pressed her palm against the tent's canvas as dusk bled into the desert sky. The low rumble of 2 diesel generators underscored the tense hush inside the operations tent, where a battered plywood board held the Black Mesa desert grid map. Inked concentric rings marked survey sectors, and 6 crimson circles denoted previous search areas, a dead end of static and fried electronics. At the map's heart, one fresh circle bore the label Delta 12. This crater held whatever had fallen from the sky. Delta Team was the only unit cleared to investigate. Sergeant Isaac Nguyen crouched beside Maya, fine-tuning the frequencies on his custom-modified radio. His dark eyes glinted beneath worn goggles as he traced signal spikes in null zones. Across the table, Corporal Alina Red Fast ran a cleaning rod through her M4's barrel with methodical precision, her expression unreadable. Private. Harris tapped the infrared monocular's dial until the eyepiece steamed over, glancing nervously at every flit of shadow. Behind them all, Dr. Marcus Lewis, the team's pathologist, hovered like a worried guardian. Clutching a field spectrometer that blinked erratically with readings from the universal slide stuck in its sample chamber. Maya inhaled through her rifle filter mask, tasting grit and anticipation. She folded her arms over her chest rig and addressed them in a calm, steady tone. Drones died last night. Satellites can't get a lock. The storm fried our cum relays above 12,000 feet. Move on foot in full kit and rely on line of sight, claymores, and good old-fashioned eyeballs. She swept her gaze across the 4 faces lit by the generator's yellow glow. Rules of engagement. If it bleeds, crawls, breathes, or even twitches, assume hostile. Your primary objective is containment and intel. Samples go into line cases. Anything missing or moved, you mark, photograph, and report via hashed stick. No data goes public until we confirm the threat level. Colonel Baines, his silhouette, framed by the tent flaps, stepped inside. His boots crunched on gravel as he approached, eyes cold and clinical. I have 90 minutes from touchdown to establish perimeter, gather samples, and request evac. We've prepped a remote drone. Drop at Zulu 4 in case you need a quick lift, but given the M signature, it may not reach you. Understood? Nguyen clicked his radio into standby. Affirmative, sir. Reed holstered her cleaning cloth. Hostile is my baseline. Harris swallowed, fingers tightening on his rifle strap. Just don't let me lag behind. Dr. Lewis cleared his throat. In contamination protocols, full armor if we see any fibrous residue. I've prepped decon kits, but no tent. You'll have to burn the suits if we get hit. He forced a weak smile. Biohazard cleanup. Yay. Baines nodded curtly. Move out. Maya checked her watch. AHO, -10. She slung her M4 across her chest and strapped on her pack. Geopucks, claymore detonators, freeze-dried rations. Extra batteries it all weighed more than a century of practice had prepared her for. Still, she felt the weight of command settle solidly across her shoulders. She turned toward the tent flap. Let's do this. Outside, 2 CH-47 Chinooks hovered in the gathering twilight, their rotor wash carving grooves in the ash-fine sand. Maya counted off her squad as they climbed aboard. Reed on, number 1 hook, Nguyen on 2, Harris 3rd, Lewis last, with herself anchoring them all. Inside the cabin's walls rattled on reinforcements and ammo racks, but there was no banter only. The steady patter of sand against metal, and the mechanical thrum of mission-ready nerves. The pilot's voice cut through the headset hiss. 300 meters to LZ, storm residuals lifting visibility at 10 meters and improving. Maya keyed her mic. Copy that. She leaned forward as the Chinook banks buffeting them against the cabin wall. Lights from the rotors. Reflection danced across the interior. Brief nods of warning that the desert could swallow them whole. When the ramp clanged open, it blasted them with choking grit. Reed's boot hit ash that swallowed her ankle, and she raised a hand to shield. Her face, Nguyen, let the ramp close behind him and punched the claymore sequence into his wrist console. Perimeter point set, he reported. Claymore is spaced at 70 meters. ready on my mark. Maya jogged to the crater's rim, verifying flags and GPS pings. Team move in wedge formation, she ordered, voice steady despite the winds. Roar. They spiraled into the bowl, rifles up, eyes scanning for movement. Harris cut left, torching the crater floor with his monocular. No heat signatures except the residue, he said. M interference still jamming my cum feed. Relay. Your sight to me, Maya replied. The trailer lay 40 meters ahead, half buried in ash, its chassis warped beyond recognition. Metal ribs protruded like broken vertebrae. On one side, chalk-white fibers spilled over the wreck's flank, coiling across the burn-black surface. They glowed faintly red in the dawn light like living embers. Dr. Lewis knelt beside the fibrous tangle and, with surgical gloves, scraped strands into a lead-lined vial. Non-carbon isotopes, he whispered, voice taut. There's heavy metals bound in an organic matrix. It's resisting my spectrometer filters. Maya crouched beside him. She ran a gloved fingertip through the fibers. They recoiled at her. Touch, knotting themselves into intricate loops as though aware of her presence. A low hum pulsed through the ground, soft, measured, insistent. She could feel it in her bones. Did you hear that? Reed trained her M4 on the trailer's undercarriage. Sounded like a heartbeat to me. She adjusted the aim dot. I'm not seeing any standard mechanical parts, just jagged voids where. Axles used to be. Harris stepped closer, rifle sweeping the crater walls. There's movement, he said softly. Down here along the ash, it's like ripples, but in solid matter. Maya glanced around. The crater walls bore shallow. Gouges in the ash at their base quivered, forming fine fingers that crept toward them. She keyed her mic, Delta Team to base. Visual on anomalous fibrous residue fused to wreckage. Possible biological agent. Harris is on thermal and sees ground symbiosis data unclear. Request evac ETA over. Static snapped back. No reply. She cursed under her breath. The sandstorm to the northwest had shifted, severing their only data lifeline. Without the Chinook, without satellites, they were truly alone. Harris took another step toward the quivering ash. I've got it. Looks like the residue's migrating. It's mapping the terrain, changing its shape. Dr. Lewis snapped the vial shut. That's the last sample I can take in the open. It's active exhaling something. Maybe spores or nanoparticles. Before Maya could process his words, a tremor rolled through the ground. The fibers on the trailer flared white-hot, then snapped back inward with a crack like shattering glass. A spiral of ash erupted from the crater's core, swirling around Harris and binding his ankle. He screamed as the dust tightened, biting through his uniform with razor-sharp intensity. He struggled, rifle flying free, but the ash coiled faster, constricting. Fuck. Reed sprinted to his side. Maya dove in front of them, weapon raised. The fibers dropped Harris to his knees and weaved around his torso like living shackles. His eyes bulged in panic. He gasped for air, but each breath rattled in his throat. Dr. Lewis lunged forward, brandishing an adrenaline syringe. Let me through. He stabbed the needle between Harris's ribs, injecting the dose. Harris convulsed violently, muscles spasming, his veins visible where the uniform tore, pulsed a sickly turquoise. He let out a staccato scream, shrill and full of terror, then slumped limp as the fibers Nguyen and Reed pried the ash from Harris's limbs and dragged him backward. Maya knelt beside him, ripping open his collar. His skin was cold, clammy, and tinged green. Eyes are fixed, she reported. No response. He's gone. Hypoxic. Reed unfolded a containment bag from her pack and armored liner that would keep fibers sealed. They wrapped Harris inside, sealing the ends with quick clamp latches. The hiss of air escaping from the bag mingled with the crackle of the fibers disappearing back into the trailer panel. The once alive strands shrank away, folding flush with the metal as if nothing had disturbed them. Maya steadied her breathing and wiped sweat from her brow. Medic on Harris, she ordered. Secure him to the litter. Prep for carry. Nguyen flagged this spot and pick up residual readings. Get me temperature and M flux on the trailer exterior. Lewis pack that? Sample case on my pack. forming a sterile bubble around this site. No one argued. Each moved with purpose, efficient despite the shock. Claymore markers popped into place around the rim, their timers set for demolition if they couldn't extract. Reed jammed a temperature probe against the trailer's side. The display jumped erratically between 400 and 800 degrees Celsius. The M-flux meter pulsed at 34 kilohertz, far beyond natural phenomena. The sun had risen fully now, scorching the crater's floor. The wind fell away, the storm's roar replaced by an oppressive stillness. In that silence, Maya could hear the faint hum beneath the metal, a residual heartbeat, constant and unwavering. She closed her eyes, picturing Harris's terrified face. They had stepped into a living entity, one that breathed through ash and bone, binding itself to earth and steel. She stood and surveyed her team, Red snapping the probe into her vest. Nguyen punching GPS coordinates into his wrist console. Lewis double-checking the sample lids, and Harris's bagged form strapped to the litter. No evac, no command. Only the promise of an arid hell they could not yet comprehend. Maya lifted her visor, the morning sun flashing off the glass. "All right," she said, voice firm. "We contain the hotspot, secure intel, and hold until evac can fight through. The storm, stay organized, we stay sharp, and we get out alive." "Understood?" They nodded, each set to their task. The desert held its breath. And at the heart of that blasted crater, something stirred, waiting for them to cross its threshold once more. They edged forward into the trailer's shattered doorway. Rifles trained and boots crunching on ash. The interior lay dark and still, the ribbed walls lined with the same white fibers that had claimed Harris. Maya took a final deep breath, steeled her nerves, and stepped inside. Leading Delta Team into the first contact with whatever had come from beyond Earth's skies, Delta Team moves through the swirling ash toward the crater's center. Boots, crunching against glassy obsidian fragments that glint like shards of broken stars. Each member leans into the bitter wind, their faces lit by the crimson glow of molten fissures snaking through the crater floor. Specialist Tran clutches the spectrometer probe as if it were a lifeline. Her breath fogs the eyepiece every time. She glances at the readout. Dr. Lewis follows close behind, adjusting cables on the M-field meter strapped to his chest. Lieutenant Harris sweeps the perimeter with a handheld radar, eyes flicking between display and terrain, hunting for secondary hotspots or hidden vents. They pause 10 meters from the fibrous residue, a tangled mass of silken filaments that wriggles across the ground like a living web. The M-meter in Lewis's hand clicks to life, needles dancing erratically between low and high peaks every few seconds. Tran kneels and plants the spectrometer's needle tip into the edge of the residue, her gloves sizzling where fiber meets metal. An infrared scan from Sergeant Kapoor's handheld imager reveals hotspots reaching 120 degrees Celsius beneath the surface, ranged in a rough spiral pattern converging on an unseen core. A sudden thud echoes from the crater rim, Harris's radar picking up a rolling boulder dislodged by subterranean tremors. The team freezes. Ash rains down as the ground shivers beneath their feet. Lewis's M-meter spikes violently, knocking his radio offline. Transpectrometer chirps, overwhelmed by an energy surge. The filaments twist and curl, rising off the ground in slow motion, as though suspended on invisible filaments of force. Every hair on their arms stands on end. "Back up," Harris orders, voice tight. The team retreats 10 meters. Tran rips the probe free and stows it, skin itching where the residue touched her glove. Kapoor reboots her infrared camera, fearing the next pulse will fry its circuits. Lewis recalibrates the M-meter, damping the sensitivity knobs until the needle steadies at a trembling oscillation. They reset the seismic sensors around the perimeter, wiring them to a portable relay so data can stream into the trailer's console. Each sensor digs a shallow pit, then vanishes beneath a layer of ash. Harris rigs tripwire alarms along the inner rim, ensuring no one can approach the central residue unseen. Despite their precautions, a low-frequency hum pulses through the crater, a sound so deep it vibrates in their bones. By midday, Dr. Lewis has mapped 3 distinct types of anomalies: thermal vortices where heat blasts upward in concentrated columns. Electromagnetic spikes centered on dark patches within the residue, and subsonic vibrations that ripple outward like the echo of a great beast stirring beneath the earth. He sketches the patterns on a waterproof tablet, his pen racing to keep pace with his thoughts. Tran examines a freshly retrieved fiber under her portable microscope, noting crystalline inclusions that glow emerald under UV light. Kapoor's infrared imager picks up an anomaly at the crater's distant rim, a faint heat signature. Cooler than the central web, but warmer than the surrounding ash. Harris volunteers to investigate, slipping away along the jagged edge of the crater while the others continue their sampling. Her departure leaves a gap in the security line, and the perimeter feels suddenly vulnerable. Inside the mobile lab, the rest of the team works under flickering lights. Instruments hum and click, generating heaps of data on laptops that feel anachronistic next to the alien fiber. When Harris's voice crackles over the radio, I found something. The mood shifts from methodical curiosity to quickened alertness. Voice trembles. She describes a second deposit of residue, half buried in basalt outcrop, glistening like oil slicks in the sun. But this portion is fused to rock, its fibers weaving into the basalt matrix. The M-meter strapped to her belt reacts violently, arcs of blue light dancing across the housing. We're on our way, Lewis replies, packing up his gear. Tran secures the last sample vial and slots binoculars into her pack. They hurry across the ash field, following Harris's GPS track. Each step sets off dormant tremors. The ground ripples beneath them like a disturbed pond. When they arrive, Harris kneels beside the embedded residue. The basalt looks warped and melted around the fibers, as though the rock itself has been rewritten. A deep crack runs beneath her knee, glowing with molten orange light. She shines her flashlight into the fissure and recoils. Something slides past the beam, a dark shape too quick to identify. A low growl reverberates from below. Tran kneels beside her, pulling a slender carbon rod from her pack. She touches it. To the interface between fiber and rock, the rod flashes white-hot, then vaporizes in a hiss of steam and ozone. The fissure expands as if alive, hot air blasting their faces. Harris scrambles back, pulling Tran with her. A wave of hot gas erupts, sending them both tumbling away from the rim. Kapoor and Lewis catch them before they disappear into the ash. The subterrestrial growl swells into a resonant roar as the ground buckles, throwing them off their feet. Mobile lab trailer rocks, lights swinging, instruments clattering across the benches. Data streams corrupt on the screens as EM interference floods the trailer. Harris dusts herself off, eyes wide. It's not rock, she gasps. It's the same material. Tran's cheeks are flushed, her gloves smoldering where fragments of the carbon rod landed. Lewis checks his M-meter readings, spiking off the chart. A new pulse wave rolls outward from the fissure, racing through the crater floor toward the central. They leap into action. Harris barks orders: seal the trailer, lock down equipment. Tran, document the fissure, but keep your distance. Kapoor, get those thermal scans back online. Kay, I'm heading back to the residue. With practiced speed, they haul steel plates across the trailer's vents, clamp foam-lined doors, and plug cables into makeshift surge protectors. Outside, the crater terrain convulses, as if reacting to their containment efforts. The fibrous web in the center shudders, violently threads snapping and reweaving in a rapid, jerky rhythm. Kapoor's thermal scans reveal 3 new hotspots forming concentric rings around the web's core. Inside, Lewis punches at his tablet, rerouting power to unaffected circuits. Sparks fly from a loose connection as the impulse surges once more. Lights flicker. Then one leg of the trailer door shudders inward, clips sheared by force. Tran's voice crackles in the headset. She's aligned her high-definition drone above the fissure, streaming video back through a shielded link. The feed shows dark tendrils of residue gripping the basalt, pulsing in time with the M-surges. Every few seconds, they retract and extend, probing deeper into the crack like hungry fingers. They're feeding, she whispers. Something's down there. Harris exchanges a look with Lewis. Field lab's compromised, she says. We need to move out. They bundle the critical instruments into pelican cases, prioritizing the mass spectrometer and M-meter. Tran scoops loose fiber into sterile vials, securing them in sealed racks. Kapoor packs the thermal imager and begins uploading a baseline scan to the relayed satellite uplink. Harris sets demolition charges at key points along the rim small. Charges meant to trigger controlled rockfalls, sealing off the embedding fissure once they evacuate. Outside, the crater gapes like an open wound. The central web emits a tremor that resonates through their gear, rattling their teeth. A final, deafening pulse radiates outward, blasting ash in a circular wave. Rocks tumble from the crater walls, dust chokes the air, and the team hustles. Across the scarred floor, they reach the Chinook's landing zone just as the first charges detonate. Explosions ripple through the basalt, ejecting boulders that collapse the fissure behind them. When the dust settles, the embedded web is buried. Beneath rubble, severed from the main residue mass. Yet in the crater's heart, the alien fiber still pulses, weaker now, as if wounded but defiant. The helicopter blades thunder overhead. Team clambers aboard, battered but alive, carrying their precious instruments and hardened samples. Through the open ramp, they stare back at the crater. Now a scarred landscape dominated by a trembling core of alien material. As the Chinook lifts off, Dr. Lewis retrieves the M-meter. Its needle oscillates between stability and chaos, reflecting the crater's final pulse against the rock. Tran examines her fiber sample, crystal inclusions flickering like trapped starlight. Kapoor reviews her thermal map, pinpointing the newly buried hotspots. Harris straps herself in, face set in grim determination. They leave behind a crater transformed a laboratory for forces beyond their understanding. A crucible where Earth science and alien technology collide. Yet even as they ascend into the sky, the residue's low mechanical hums in their memories. A reminder that some wounds never heal, some mysteries refuse to remain buried. What they've witnessed will rewrite their understanding of geology, physics, and perhaps life itself. But for now, all that matters is getting home, analyzing their data, and preparing for what comes next, because the crater's pulse still echoes in the air and somewhere. Deep beneath the rubble, the alien web is weaving its next move. The Chinook's rotors slowed against the roar of the wind. As it touched down on the helipad at Eden Outpost, a matte black structure, half buried in permafrost and surrounded by jagged ice spires. Delta Team clambered out, each member weighed down by exhaustion and by the pelican cases cradling their precious instruments. A bitter chill bit at their exposed skin even through thick flight suits. The cold seemed to leach warmth from bone and metal alike. Inside the hangar, technicians swarmed around the arrivals bay, swiping ID badges and logging each piece of equipment. A generator hummed on low idle, muffling the far-off howl of the Arctic wind. Dr. Lewis paused at the airlock, taking a moment to steady himself before sliding the sample rack into a sterilized glove box. Specialist Tran followed, her fingers brushing over the fiber vials, as though they were fragile embryos. Harris watched them both, scanning the perimeter through reinforced windows, eyes narrowed against the glare of overhead sodium lights. Once, inside the containment wing, they transferred the central web sample into a vacuum-sealed chamber, equipped with thermoelectric cooling coils. The mass spectrometer and M-field meter were plugged into the station's power grid, their sensors calibrated 2-millisecond precision. Tran secured the final fiber vial in a biohazard cabinet, its emerald crystalline veins faintly glowing under UV illumination. The glow pulsed in perfect harmony with the hum of the facility's magnetic stabilizer, detail none of them missed, just hours earlier. On the flight back, Lewis had pored over his tablet's crater map, replaying M surges in slow motion. Temperature vortices at 120 degrees Celsius, subsonic tremors rolling outward in concentric waves, fibers weaving into basalt and disappearing beneath falling boulders. It felt like unraveling a higher-order geometry, something alive. Calculating, learning, now surrounded by sterile corridors and hush of filtered air, that same pulse lingered. Tran tapped the chamber's outer wall. "It's still alive," she whispered. Her breath fogged the glass momentarily, then cleared to reveal the web's delicate filaments. Shifting slowly as if riding a miniature storm within, Lewis keyed a command on the spectrometer's interface. A holographic readout flickered above the analyzer's bay, peaks of unknown isotopes, interlaced with signatures no terrestrial element should share. He zoomed in on a narrow band of crystalline resonance and frowned. These emission lines, they're amplifying over time. It's as if the material is feeding on our containment field. Behind them, a red warning light blinked on the M monitor. The field meter's needle quivered between stability and chaos. Harris moved closer to the console. We saw that in the crater. Every pulse echoed back an hour later. The crater isn't the only thing that hums. This lab is part of the loop now. Kapoor, stationed at the thermal reader, froze mid-scroll. That can't be right. She pointed at the cold wall behind them. Infrared feedback displayed a hotspot, forming where no heat source existed. Orange dot glowing through the paneling, gradually growing in intensity. Something's heating up inside the containment chamber. But our coolant's maxed out. Lewis grabbed a screwdriver and pried open a maintenance port. Inside the cooling coil, frost had liquefied into a viscous gel. Pipes rattled with internal stress as the temperature gauge climbed toward danger. Tran's hand hovered over the emergency jettison lever, but Harris blocked her. Not yet. We need as much data as we can get. A sharp clatter echoed down the corridor. Footsteps, distant but certain, crunching on ice-slick metal. Sergeant's radio chirped to life. Sergeant Malik reporting an unexpected access request at Gate B. Gate B was the dormitory wing off limits to all but sleeping personnel. Malik's voice trembled through the coms. Swear I locked it. Then I hear someone creaking through the vents. Harris snapped her head toward the intercom panel. She toggled the com. What's your status? Malik's reply crackled back. I'm alone in my quarters. No one else here. But there's a shadow moving behind my door. The line went dead, replaced by static and a faint metallic rasp. Lewis released the lever. The containment chamber's door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Inside, the central web had begun unraveling itself from the mounting plate. Threads snaked through the mounting holes in search of purchased tendrils probing the edges of the box. Tran launched forward, glove-clad hands dancing across controls, but a sudden surge of M energy threw her against the far wall. She slid, down, gasping. Harris and Lewis rushed to help her up. Containment breach, Harris shouted. Seal the wing. Lock down every bulkhead. Alarms blared. Fluorescent lights flickered as power diverted to emergency protocols. Bulkhead doors slammed shut with pneumatic thuds isolating the containment wing in a corridor of threat. The pulse from the sample had rippled through the facility's magnetic field. Triggering failsafes, Kapoor keyed her tablet frantically. We're reading coherence across 3 sectors: fiber resonance, magnetic shields, even life sign sensors. It's syncing us all. Through the sealed viewport, Tran watched the web's emerald glow intensify. Its filaments wove outward, crossing the threshold between chamber and chamber, reaching for the circuitry that held them in stasis. A distant crash resonated from the dormitory wing. Harris grabbed her sidearm and pointed at the corridor door. We may have to fight our own lab to get back to Malik. Lewis shouted over the alarm's wail. First we secure the sample, then we regroup. He reached for a reinforced crate and began scooping out the spectrometer and M-meter. The crate's walls were lined with mu metal and ceramic insulation. As Lewis loaded the gear, the air filled with a low hum so deep it vibrated in their bones. Kapoor ripped open a pack of coolant gel pouches and handed them to Tran. Reinforce the chamber walls, anything to hold it back. Together, they jerry-rigged layers of cooling gel and composite panels to the chamber's interior, clamping them into place as the web's filaments pressed against the glass. Tran's gloves glowed white in the UV light as she worked. Outside, the panic intensified. Footsteps pounded through the maintenance ducts above. A wet, slithering sound echoed from the sealed hinges of the bulkhead doors. Harris raised her weapon, lips tight. We're out of time, she said. Once that thing gets into the vents, it'll be everywhere. Pull the plug-ject containment pod into the Arctic ice. Better to freeze it for a century than let it learn our systems. Lewis hesitated. fingers on the manual release. The spectrometer's interface readout blinked with rising entropy. Tran gave him a trembling nod. He pulled the lever. A pneumatic. Latch snapped open, and the containment crate dropped into the airlock's gravity chute. The inner door sealed behind it, followed by the outer door's slow hiss. The crate slid down the airlock shaft, out into the swirling storm beyond. Inside the lab, the lights steadied. The M-spikes subsided to a dull throb. The reinforced chamber doors held. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the heavy breathing of the team. Harris barked orders. We move or we lose the rest of this station. I want Malik safe. I want the vents cleared, and then a full diagnostics on every system. We're vulnerable. They arched into motion. Tran cast one last glance at the empty cavity where the web had pressed against the glass. Of the UV lamps, she swore she saw a single filament pulse waves of emerald ripples that spoke of memory. Of data archived in living crystal, something that refused to stay buried. As the team disappeared into the reddened corridors, Eden, outposts trembled in the night. Through the grated floors and behind every vent, the echo of that alien web's mechanical hum lingered, an unspoken promise that their fight was only just beginning. The corridors beyond the sealed bulkheads were bathed in emergency red light, casting long, jittering shadows that danced along grated floors. Harris led the way, sidearm raised, every footstep echoing through the metal shafts. Behind her, Kapoor's tablet glowed with schematics of the vent system, marking possible routes to gate B. The humming pulse of the alien web vibrated through the vents, a low, insistent thrum that seemed to follow their progress. They paused at a T-junction, where the grated ceiling panels had been pried open. Through the gaps, they could hear wet, slithering movements above, accompanied by the faint hiss of displaced air. Harris tapped her. Come, Malik. Can you hear us? Static answered. Then a hoarse whisper. It's here. I can feel it tapping inside the walls. Her voice cut out as a metallic rasp scraped along the corridor behind them. Kapoor illuminated the junction with a handheld UV lamp. The vent walls were streaked with gleaming emerald filaments, tracing arcs that pulsed in rhythm with the web's core back in containment. Each filament shimmered like living circuitry, embedding itself into every joint and seam. Harris scanned. Upward. It's networked, she said. It's learning our infrastructure. They squeezed through the narrow shaft access, moving as silently as possible. Above them, the faint glow of the filaments mirrored their path, revealing how extensively the web had spread. Kapoor cross-referenced her layout. If we follow this tracer line, it leads straight to the central stack vent above the dormitory. Harris nodded and crouched to continue forward. The grated floor vibrated with each step, as though the station itself was alive and uneasy under their weight. At the far end, they found the stack vent's locking mechanism torn open, metal teeth hanging loose. Harris slipped inside. The red lights fading behind her into blackness. Down below in the containment wing, Lois and Tran worked feverishly to restore partial control over the station's systems. They had rerouted emergency power through a priority bus, isolating the containment pods from the rest of the grid. Every console flickered with warning flags, EM interference, magnetic fluctuations, and life sign anomalies in vacant corridors. Tran's gloved hands flew over the diagnostic panel. I've got a feedback loop in Sector C, she said. If we don't dump that before they breach the firewall, the entire power grid will go down. Lewis tapped the com. Harris, we need 15 minutes to stabilize the bus. Can you hold the corridor until then? Silence answered. Moments later, Harris's voice crackled back. Make it 10. In the dormitory wing, Harris and Kapoor emerged from the ventilation shaft into a darkened hallway lined with bulkhead doors. The emergency lights had failed here, leaving them to rely on their torches. Kapoor's thermal reader revealed distorted heat signatures flickering inside the walls like hearts beating in metal. I think it's tunneling toward the quarters, she whispered. They advanced door by door, using magnetic clamps to shut each after passing. At the third door, Malik's panicked voice shouted from within. Harris kicked it open to find him pressed against the far console, eyes wide with terror. Behind him, the panel was covered in emerald threads that writhed like microscopic serpents. Harris yanked him back just as a filament shot out, latching onto the console and sparking the wires. Malik staggered free, trying to override. "The life sign monitors?" he gasped. "It knows who we are, where we sleep, everything." Kapoor jammed a ceramic wedge into the console, severing the filament's path. Sparks crackled, and the threads retracted with a hiss. Above them, distant rumbles signaled the vent stack they had used collapsing inward. The station bucked as emergency bulkheads engaged. Harris checked her watch. 5 minutes until power. "Reroute," she said. "Need to get back up to the containment wing." Tran and Lewis may not hold out much longer. They moved in a sprint, Malik leaning on Harris's shoulder. The evacuated floors vibrated as the alien web adapted to their barricades, rerouting through hidden ducts. Kapoor led them through a service hatch and up a ladder toward the main conduit at the top. They found the hatch sealed from the outside. Emerald light seeped through the seams, revealing a tangle of filaments weaving into the bulkhead. Harris pulled her cutter and sliced a path through the mesh, each snip accompanied by the web's keening pulse. When they burst into the containment wing, Tran and Lewis were finishing their override. The emergency bus hummed with stable current, the console warnings flickering back to green. "Just in time," Lewis said, relief washing over his face. Harris secured Malik, while Kapoor activated the recalibrated magnetic dampeners. The alien web's glow dimmed as the field pulsed through the station's spine, severing its extensional network. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, broken only by the distant groan of shifting metal. But through the sealed viewport of the containment chamber, they watched the last tendrils within coil back into the core, an emerald spiral contracting toward an unseen center. And as the station systems hummed back to life, they knew the web had tasted the full complexity of Eden Outpost. The Chinook's cabin rattled with every gust. But inside, the tension was almost as thick as the ice beyond the windows. Harris sat forward in her seat, boots braced against the metal floor. Watching Malik secure the high-tension cable that lashed the pod's reinforced crate to the deck, through the frosted viewport, the fractured flow shrank into a chaos of white and gray, splintered ice, drifting apart like distant continents breaking free. Tran leaned over the console, fingers flying across a touchscreen that fed continuous data from the pod's internal sensors. Temperature, M-field strength, crystal, resonance frequencies. Each metric pulsated in time with the web's heartbeat, and every beat felt like a countdown. Lewis checked the coolant lines, tightening valves with deliberate care. His knuckles gleamed with frost as he wiped away condensation. Kapoor hovered. Nearby, thermal blasters slung across her back, scanning the seals for any filament intrusion. The only sound among them was the low whine of the Chinook's engines everywhere. The unshakable knowledge that at any moment the web could break free again. When the hatch sealed behind them at Eden Outpost, the cold inside the hangar felt almost comforting. The team hustled the pod down the ramp, each step echoing on the concrete floor. 2 technicians in hazmat gear met them, carrying induction coils and mu metal plating to bolster the containment field. Bright floodlights cut through the stale air as Tran and Lewis guided the crate into the far corner of Lab Delta 3. A reinforced chamber ringed by spare cryogenic canisters and power converters. Harris double-checked the chamber's integrity, while Kapoor and Malik anchored steel cables to the floor, ensuring the pod couldn't topple even under a powerful jolt. As the technicians sealed the inner door, the chamber's lights dimmed, replaced by the soft green glow of the pod's crystal shell. Everyone stood back, watching the emerald pulse that throbbed within softer now, but unmistakably alive. Lewis slid a series of data cables through the hatch's feed-through port, connecting the pod's internal diagnostics to the lab's mainframe. A chorus of alerts popped up, slight pressure fluctuations, tiny spikes in magnetic flux, a steady rise in moisture content around the web's outer filaments. Tran tapped her glove against a sensor display. "It's absorbing our containment field," she said, voice low. "Every day it grows more efficient at feeding on ambient energy." She pointed to a histogram showing the crystal resonance. amplitude climbing in perfect correlation with the chamber's temperature differential. If we don't isolate it, it'll drain us dry. Harris tightened her grip on the rail overhead. Then we cut the power. We box it in total darkness. And cold until reinforcements arrive. Lewis nodded, but didn't look convinced. The pod's glow only wavered when they cycled off non-essential systems, and even then, it adapted, tapping directly into the backup battery lines. 15 minutes later, as the lab's monitors flickered under the strain of red alert lights, an alarm sounded on the environmental control panel. The thermoelectric chillers had failed. Ice crystals had jammed the evaporator fins, halting coolant flow. The chamber's exterior temperature climbed from minus 20 degrees Celsius toward freezing. Harris barked orders. Manual override on the secondary loop. Kapoor, prep the liquid nitrogen feed. Malik sprinted for the cryo canisters, wheeling them into position. While Tran and Lewis wrestled with power relays and emergency shutoffs, sparks flew when Lewis rerouted the circuit. And for a moment, the entire lab plunged into near blackness until backup lighting kicked in the brief silence. The pod's emerald glow flared, filaments pressing against the inside of its crystalline shell with uncanny insistence. There was no sound from the web, only a vibration that crept through the floor into their boots and settled into their bones. Harris raised her hand. Now, she said. Kapoor opened the cryomanifold, unleashing a gale of minus 196 degrees Celsius vapor that surged into the chamber through reinforced hoses. Frost raced across the pod's surface, icing the shell in a tapestry of delicate patterns. The thermocouples screamed as the internal temperature plummeted, but the web fought back. A pulse of heat blasted outward, wicking the frost from the shell, where its filaments kept closest to the inner wall. Tran slid closer, baton-sized sensor probe in hand. She held it against a fracture in the shell's seal and whispered, "This isn't just containment, it's communication." On her display, the resonance pattern shifted into repeated sequences, as if the web were tapping out a code. Lewis peered over her shoulder. "You mean it's talking to us?" Tran's eyes didn't leave the readout, for it's learning. Our languagism spikes exactly mimic the station's telemetry signals. It's syncing to us. Harris clenched her jaw. We shut off all non-critical systems. We isolate the chamber completely. No more data in or out. She strode to the control console and keyed the lockdown protocol. The chamber's feed-through ports sealed with hydraulic thuds. Screens blinked off. Only the pod's menacing pulse remained, now a slow, deliberate heartbeat that filled the silence like distant thunder. Seconds later, the intercom crackled. Sergeant Malik's voice wavered through static. "Ma'am, you better come see this." Harris exchanged a look with Tran, then unlocked the lab doors. They filed out to the corridor, Kapoor flicking her UV lamp as they advanced toward the life support manifold. The walls were slick with moisture and mapped across every pipe. Cable and joint were ghostly green streaks where the web had crept. Tiny filaments had already repaired the emergency lighting conduit, drawing power back into themselves. The station's atmosphere unit was half submerged in emerald veins. A sweet metallic odor met them in the airlock, like rust in the rain. In the air scrub vestibule, Malik pointed to a shattered viewport on the HEPA filter housing. The glass lay scattered on the floor, shards glittering with microscopic webbing. "Force the breach from the inside," he said. Harris peeled off. Her glove and tapped a shard with her fingernail. The fragment pulsed once, then fused itself back together in a burst of static arc. She yanked her hand away, skin tingling where the glass had touched. "We're on borrowed time." Lewis knelt and attached a portable field generator to the filter's inlet. "We'll isolate the scrubber," he said, "and purge it with high-temperature plasma. It'll burn out any organic or crystalline structure." He activated the generator. The rod inside the housing glowed white, then violet, and the chamber filled with ozone and heat. Filaments writhed in the glow, then melted in hissing bursts. By the time the plasma purge ended, 3 corridors down the filtration level were sealed off by emergency bulkheads. Harris keyed her, "Comes Mike. Central Command, this is Delta Team. Life support filters are offline for maintenance. Expect respiratory bypass protocol to engage in T-minus 5 minutes. A calm voice answered. Copy that. All stations are advised to switch to manual O intake. She switched off the mic. Manual protocols buy us time, but the pods. Getting colder, and the web has never stopped adapting. They circled back to Lab Delta 3, each footstep crunching on contaminated absorbent mats that Kapoor had spread earlier. Tran paused at the chamber, feeling the hum through her boot. It's learning our architecture, she said. Every seal we close, every field we activate, it's stirring. Lewis slid a hand over the port's scratch-resistant glass. Then we make sure the pod never leaves isolation again. Harris shook her head. We can't guard it forever, and we can't destroy it data. Too valuable. We need a plan that contains and studies, not locks and buries. Before anyone could respond, the station shuddered a deep, resonant tremor that rattled the entire floor. Lights flickered. The hum in the pod stuttered and then resumed at a faster tempo. Harris grabbed the rail and looked at Malik. Sensors, he answered, tapping his wrist console. Seismic activity under the permafrost, the old craters stirring again. Could be another pulse wave. Harris clenched her fists. Tremor from the crater had echoed through the station before, so this one was different steady, measured as if someone was testing a signal. Lock down the labs, she ordered. Full shield protocol. You don't know what's coming. In the Combs Bay, Kapoor raced to reconfigure the external arrays. The storm outside had eased to a haze under the midnight sun, but visibility remained poor. She aligned the dish to receive from the crater's seismic beacon, feeding data direct to the analysis mainframe. Screen filled with waveforms, 3 new spikes, each stronger than the last. She transmitted them to Lab Delta 3. They're phasing through our shields in real time, she said. Every wave is learning to bypass our isolation. Harris took a deep breath. Then we don't just react. We preempt. She pulled up the station's excavation schematics. A network of service tunnels led from the crater rim up to the lab wing. We mount a strike team to target the new vent we found. The web is reconnecting. We cut its veins at the source. Lewis frowned. We'll have to venture back into the crater zone. But with the pod here, we'll start on half measures. Tran shook her head. No. We neutralize before we contain. Flush the entire vent network with excimer lasers and supercooled fog. The crater's no longer a curiosity. Battlefield. Overhead, the station's lights dimmed again, settling into the power floor that reserved juice for life support and vital systems. Everyone felt the chill in the dark. Harris looked at her team, each face set in determination. Edged with doubt, we prepare tonight. At first light, we move on the crater. We strike at every vent, every fissure, every conduit we know the web uses. And when they jettisoned the pod, we dug its claws into the ISO. We'll bring the heat and the cold and every tool we have right to its heart. The pod's green heartbeat pulsed in reply through the chamber wall. Once, twice, accelerating as though in applause as they dispersed to ready weapons. Suit up and load gear, the corridor lights flickered out completely. Total darkness. Cut. Only by the emergency lumens along the handrails and the faint glow of the pod's crate, sitting silent and waiting in the heart of Lab Delta 3, the web's voice echoed in every hum and vibration of the station. We know you. We see you. And tomorrow, you will find out just how deep our roots go. The sky was a bruise of purple and red when Delta Team rumbled out of Eden Outpost on the tracked armored carrier. Frost-coated treads gouged shallow trenches in the permafrost as the engines coughed, black exhaust into the still air. Each soldier clutched their gear like a declaration of intent. Lasers, plasma torches, cryogenic injectors, seismic disruptors, and high-yield charges primed for the final assault. Harris stood at the back hatch, eyes narrowed against the sudden glare of the rising sun. The crater lay 20 kilometers ahead, its rim marked only by the thin column of steam drifting upward.
Oh.
Behind that steam, fibrous networks fanned through, every fissure like roots of an impossible tree. Today they'd rip it free, unearth its heart, and destroy it before its tentacles could reach any other outpost. The vehicle convoys rolled in leaden silence, broken only by static bursts of radio. Chatter, time checks, system statuses, environmental scans. Lewis monitored the pod in transit's vitals on his wrist plate, nodding at each stable reading. Tran double-checked her resonance detector's calibration, ensuring no harmonic could blind her vision. Kapoor loaded spare batteries into the thermal cannon, the cartridges clicking home with meticulous precision. Permafrost gave way to fields of black glass and shattered. Basalt where the crater moaned beneath their weight. The air shimmered with heat emanating from deep below, and each footstep felt like pressing into a wound. They disembarked, chainmail armored gloves digging into the rocky soil. Harris tapped her cum, grid-burning mags ahead. Set breach. Protocols. They spread out in a diamond formation, boots sinking into fractured glass flakes. Harris's drone skimmed ahead, broadcasting real-time 3D maps, overlaid with thermal hotspots. When the first cluster of fibrous residue appeared, it was half buried in obsidian shards, filaments coiling like trapped octopi. Tran caught it under her UV lamp and flinched. The green glow spelled danger, and the hum beneath it vibrated. Through her chest plate, Kapoor unleashed a short burst of white-hot plasma. The cluster sizzled in a micro-fountain of ozone and steam, emerald shards flecking the air. But for every filament charred, 2 more sprouted in the surrounding crevices. The web was not a static network. It rebuilt itself faster than they could. Burn it away. Harris adjusted her helmet cum. Secondary frost wave now, as canisters hissed, spitting liquid nitrogen that coated the shattered fibers. The frost silenced the hum and bleached the residue pale blue. The silence was brief. Tremor shivered through the ground as if the crater itself exhaled in pain. Seismic sensors hammered the readouts, ripples spreading outward, accelerating. The cracks in the glass above them rattled, without warning. A shockwave slapped the team against the rock boots sliding, helmets clanging. Harris steadied herself, hand on the rail of a boulder. Status, she barked. Moloch's boots ground to a halt, all sensors green, no structural collapse detected. Nothing but that thing fighting back. Tran checked her tablet. Every temperature sensor spiked by 20 degrees and then collapsed. M-field spiked, flaring into arcs of green lightning where they had already purified the area. The web had learned to channel energy, using the very weapons they deployed as fuel. Lewis knelt beside the frost-rimed cluster and tapped his spec probe into the surface. "It's not carbon-based," he muttered, face ghostly under his lamp. "Crystalline. Silicate with metallic alloys I can't even pronounce. It's alive in every sense, like a plant that photosynthesizes electromagnetic fields." He withdrew the needle studded with emerald ice and sealed it in a vial. Data locked. Now let's kill the plant. Downtown, the crater floor opened into a vast arena rimmed by molten fissures that glowed like the coals of a dying bonfire. The central void yawned before them, a dark maw halfway down the slope. Ropes laced with sensors hung from the lip, pulsing with every footfall. Harris looked at the map. Dozens of side vents branching off, hidden spider legs of tunnels. She calculated. "We detonate here, here, and here," she said, tapping her screen. "Then flood the core with freeze and flame. A splayed. Charges at key junction C4. Shaped charges, linear cutting erasal. Time to detonate in sequence." Each team member handled a sector. Kapoor on the north vent, Lewis on the south cluster, Tran and Malik at the east approach. Harris placed the master deck cord along the ridgeline, fingers trembling only slightly as she clipped the blasting cable to her belt. With the charges set, the team retreated to a safe zone near the ridge, behind a wall of excavator-turned barricade. Each soldier locked eyes briefly, sharing the weight of uncertainty. Harris keyed her cum mic. Det planned in 30 seconds. "Check your safety protocols." Cameras on the drone circled back, feeds encrypted and streamed to every console. At Eden Outpost, and the timer hit 5 seconds. Lewis gave the go. C4 detonated with a roar that shattered silence and glassy basalt alike. Plumes of steam, dust, and vapor shot skyward. Shockwaves rattled the station, echoing off the frozen ridges in deep cacophonous booms. The second array tore open a vein of the web network, sending filaments snapping like ruptured tendons. Sparks flew as roasted fibers met molten rock. The crater floor shook, and the giant maw yawned wider. A golden heat stroke soared from the blasts, igniting pockets of residual web in a ring around the explosion. The team braced, ears ringing as the ground bucked. Through the haze, they watched. The central fissure glowed blue and white as torrents of liquid nitrogen gushed through overhead nozzles. It was a manic duel, fire against frost, each trying to outpace the other. The web writhed at the core. A tremor more violent than the rest shook the ground. The main fissure cracked open further, revealing a cavernal chamber lit by the web's own bioluminescence. Threads cascaded like stalactites, pooling in a gelatinous lake of iridescent liquid. At that moment, the containment pod's resonant signature spiked in every console back at Eden Outpost. A perfect echo of the live battle. The web was linked to its spawn here. Without hesitation, Harris barked, "Last phase terminate." They unleashed interior charges, micro-warheads designed to superheat and carbonize. Explosions rolled through the entrails of the crater, sending shards of charred web flying. Kapoor pumped in a final blast of plasma, vaporizing any living residue on contact. Tran swept the area with excimer lasers, carving geometric cuts in two, the crystalline strands until they collapsed in on themselves. The crater roiled as if convulsing. Then, just as suddenly, the tremors ceased. In the aftermath, a hush blanketed the arena. Filaments lay blackened and brittle, fractured across the floor. Steam hissed as frost and flame receded, leaving nothing but ruin. Harris lowered her rifle, voice hoarse. "Pull back, we move." The team sprinted toward the extraction point as the ground settled under their feet. Each step kicked rocks and desiccated web spores, scattering in the cold wind. Behind them, seismic charges collapsed, the remaining tunnel entrances sealing the crater's veins forever. The echo of collapsing rock sounded through the eardrums like a verdict. This vein of the web was dead. They piled into the carriers as the sun cleared the horizon. Engines roared to life. As they left the crater rim, Harris looked down at the smoking scars etched into the ice. It was over, truly over, or so they believed. Lewis glanced at his screen, all biosensors flat. Tran gripped the rail, exhaustion written across her face. Kapoor and Malik shared a look of relief tempered by unease. They had one, but the cost lay in every charred fracture of the earth. Back at Eden Outpost, the lab doors slid open on hiss of hydraulics. The team hauled the empty charges and spent cartridges inside. The pod sat in its reinforced chamber, its glow faded to a faint pulse reminiscent of a death knell. Harris keyed the containment interface. The chamber sealed behind her with a pneumatic sigh. All external power lines were cut. Only the minimal systems fed the pod now. Lewis reconnected the crate's diagnostics. Data streams flickered in the dim green light. Resonance frequencies damped. EM fields stabilized. Moisture content dropped to baseline. The final readouts scrawled across the lab monitors. 98% web depletion. Crystalline mass reduced by 95%. Those last 5% carried subthreshold spikes. But when Lewis attempted to probe them, the pod's pulse slowed to a halt, then stuttered.
Ow.
Silence filled Lab Delta 3 like a vacuum. The only sound was the tick of the containment chamber's backup timer, counting down the isolation cycle. Harris exhaled, shoulders collapsing. Kapoor slumped against the glass. Malik unstrapped his helmet and massaged his jaw. Tran cradled her resonance detector, tears frozen on her cheeks. Lewis placed a hand on the crate. It's done. Outside technicians whispered among themselves, monitoring every gauge as they transferred control back to standard operations. Eden's mainframe displayed a single alert: threat neutralized. Tonight they'd celebrate, but none would forget the sacrifice. The crater's scars would remain, a testament to what had nearly consumed them. And every shard of shattered web that drifted in the permafrost would carry the memory of its fall. In the aftermath, protocols changed. No longer would Eden Outpost accept alien samples without ironclad redundancy. Every new specimen would be quarantined in triple-layered mu metal pods housed far beneath the station. Emergency response drills would become daily routines, so when the next contagion slipped through, they would be ready without hesitation. Harris walked the cleared corridors alone after midnight, scanning each vent panel on her patrol. She paused before the massive door of Lab Delta 3 and peered through the reinforced viewport. Pod lay dark, its crystalline shell dull. Even the faintest emerald pulse had ceased, as she whispered to the glass. Rest now. And for the first time in weeks, the station felt hers again. The sun dipped below the horizon 3 times before the evacuation convoy departed. Engineers loaded the spent charges onto sleds bound for deep ice laboratories, searchers cataloging every spike in waveform. At dawn on the 4th day, Eden Outpost sent its final transmission, coordinates for cleanup crews, and an over-channel broadcast of the battle footage. The world watched the screens flicker with molten web and screaming charges, proof of humanity's fierce will to survive. Months later, when the ice thawed slightly under the summer sun, a single expedition bore down on Deltanine Sector. They found nothing but sunken glass shards and collapsed tunnels. No web, no traces of filaments, just cold stone etched with fissures. The crater was reclaimed by the earth, moss, lichen, and the patience of time. Eden Outpost's name became legend in scientific circles, a line drawn in frozen sand. But legends endure because they warn. In the labs, Tran presented her final report. The alien web's genetic code truncated in multiple loci. Critical enzymes neutralized by cryoplasma, yet a single fragment of unpowered filament, when immersed in solvents, recombined its matrix. Under a microscope, it pulsed once as if testing the air. She ended her presentation with a single warning: containment must be eternal. Harris, now promoted to station commander, listened from the front row. When the lights returned to normal, she rose and faced the audience of global researchers. We lost friends, we shattered our world, and we saw what lies beneath. Stand as our shield and our sword. We will guard the silence where it sleeps, but we will never forget its song. She stepped down, shoulders squared in defiance. The hum of conversation swelled around her. But her mind drifted back to the crater's edge, the bitter wind. The roar of charges, the pulse of emerald light fading into darkness. It was over. Yet she knew deep down that the last beat had not been silenced entirely. Somewhere in the cold, in the fractures of the earth, the alien web awaited a new current, a fresh spark, and humanity's watch would never.
Make sure to subscribe and tap the bell before the next encounter begins.